Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to part 2 to my Pay What You Want 2D Hack and Slash course here on YouTube. As always, down in the description, there is a link to the resources required for this course and a link to my pixel art course on Udemy. Those are the two ways that you can donate to support this course. Let's get started. So in our last video, we imported in the sprites for our character, our skeleton, and we set up a skeleton object. We set up a basic level with a view in that level, and we wrote our very first piece of code where we set the image speed in the create event of our skeleton object so that it wouldn't move too quickly. Now we're going to be setting up some basic movement for our character. And the kind of movement that we use in GameMaker, there's a lot of different ways that you can move a character. So choosing which system you want to use for movement can be important. For this game, we can use a fairly simple form of movement. So let's add a new event. We're going to write some more code here. We're going to add a new event, and we're going to add a step event. Now a step event is, remember I said events are the when. Well, the when for this is every single frame of the game. So this is every single time the game updates, it's going to run this code. So we'll add in our step event right here. Now we need to be able to move the character, and GameMaker is set up with a grid system. And if I open up paint.net here, I can show you what that looks like. So we have a grid like this, where this is the Y and this is the X. However, in terms of our screen, you have to imagine that this grid is a limited size, right? So this is our grid size. And everything inside of here is a little teeny pixel, right? There's a bunch of little pixels on your screen inside of here. So this, we still have our grid set up right here. Let me switch this to a red. So we still have our grid set up. However, this direction right here is positive X. Well, this direction right here, going up like this, is actually negative Y. Negative Y. Now, why, you might ask? That is because GameMaker counts this top tiny little pixel right here as 0, 0. So this is position 0, 0. And as you go down towards the bottom of the screen, so as you count down pixels, it adds pixels. So this right here, this pixel right here might be pixel X position, or let's see, X position 0, Y position 10. Because we've gone down 10 pixels down to get to here, right? And if you pick a random pixel on the screen, like say this one, you could imagine that this pixel is, let's say we'll say that it's 12 pixels down on the Y, and then on our X position, how many pixels over it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Count clear over to like here, and we get to, let's say it's 24. This is a small game if it's only this big. But you can imagine now how that works. Now, one way to move an object inside of your game is to add to its current X position. So let's say our little character is right here. We've got a little character right here, and his X position is right along here, like this. If his current X position is say 12, if we add to his current X position, so like say we add 4, that will move him over this direction by 4 pixels. And he will get 4 pixels closer to that way. So let's create a new thing here just in case I need it later. And then we'll come back and we will add to our character's X position. And the way you can do this is you can say X, which means our current X position, equals x, so our current x position again, plus 4. So this means take our current x position and set it equal to our current x position plus 4. And this is a very common way to introduce movement. You'll see our character just kind of moves off the screen there. Without any control. We don't have control over him. He's just following his programming, right? He's just moving. Now there's a shortcut for this, which is you can just do x plus equals 4. And if you do that, it's the same thing as saying x equals x plus 4. It's a shortcut. It means add relative to. So add 4 relative to our current position. Now what would happen if you just did x equals 4? Well, instead of moving our character over by 4, all it does is set the character's position to x equals 4, which means he'll instantly jump to x position 4, which apparently is right here because of his sprite size. So this is x position 4. He's not moving though, because we're just setting his position to 4 every single turn, and it's the same. So that's not what we want. We want plus equals. How do we get control? Right now our character is moving and we don't have any control over this character. Well, we need to introduce some way to branch code. Basically, we need a way to say, if the player is doing something, then run this code, but if they're not, then don't run this code, because we don't want the skeleton to move anymore. We only want it to move when the player is doing something. So branching code steps in with an if statement. So we can say if something is happening, then, and I'm going to put these brackets just like this, run some code. So let's just do this. If something is happening right here, then run some code. And I highly recommend tabbing your code in right here so that you can tell that this is part of an if statement, that this is part of branching code. And using tabs like this is a way to indicate. I've seen some of the hardest code to work with is code where you can't immediately visually tell where the branches in the code are. But if you tab it like this, you can immediately visually tell where those branches are. Now, some people do their code like this, and some people do it like this. I'm going to try and remember to do it like this because I think it's easier for beginners. Now, one thing that I've been doing that I haven't necessarily brought up is the semicolon. I always put a semicolon at the end of my statements. So up here you can see in our create event we have a semicolon. Right here in our step event we have a semicolon. These aren't, they're not always necessary, but they are necessary sometimes. And so I just recommend using them always so that you don't have to worry about it. So highly recommend using semicolons always. Now, what do we want for our player to have to do here? Well, we want the player to have to press a key, right? In order to move to the right. So we're going to add a new little bit of code here. We're going to call a function called keyboard check. Now this function is used to check when the player is pressing a key on the keyboard. And we can use, you can see it needs parentheses and then a key. So we're going to tell it a key. So we'll add our parentheses, but then what key do we put inside of here? Well, let's open up the help again. We'll middle click on that function. You can see returns whether a given key on the keyboard is currently held down, and it returns a Boolean. Now, Boolean just means true or false. So this will be false if they're not pressing the key, and true if they are pressing the key. And you can see the key is the key to check the state of. And in their example here, they have VK left. This is looking really familiar to our code, isn't it? Right? This little example here. So if keyboard check, this is why the help is so useful. If keyboard check VK left, then X minus equals 5. Okay, so we can guess from this that VK right is probably the key that we want for moving to the right, but we should learn to navigate the help a little bit better. So if you click right here, you'll see there's back, and this takes us to keyboard input. We can click on this, and this gives us a general description of keyboard input inside of GameMaker. And I'd really recommend, if you want to use this engine, I'd really recommend reading these. You don't have to do them all at once. You can do them one at a time as they become necessary. So right now you're learning about keyboard input. Now would be a great time to read this information right here. It's well put together and worth your time. But you can see here's a list of all the keys that you can choose from. VK no key, VK any key, VK left, and little descriptions for each one. And here's the one we want, VK right, key code for right arrow key. So that will give us the right arrow key. Let's come back into our workspace, and we'll do, inside of here, we'll do VK right. And you can see it highlights and lights up. Now we can save our game with Control S and run our game. There's a shortcut for running your game, which is F5. So F5 to run the game. And now our character doesn't move when we're not pressing anything, because why? Because this right here is returning 0 or returning false. So it's saying if this is true, well, it's not, it's false. So it's not even running this code, it's just skipping right over it. However, if we press the right key, our character moves to the right and we have movement. So now I'm going to give you guys a challenge. It's a mini challenge. You're going to try, and you're going to pause your video, and you're going to write your very own code without my help. You're going to make it so that the character can move to the left using the left key. So pause your video right now. Okay, I pause for just a second, and now we're ready to go. I'm going to show you, just in case you had troubles with it. We're going to write a new if statement, keyboard check, VK left, add new brackets in, tab over, X minus equals 4. So remember, if you remember our grid, going to the right is positive and going to the left is negative. So we want left minus equals 4. And now we can run our game, and we have movement in both directions. Okay? And this is quite a bit of code. You've written, what, 10 lines of code now. 10 lines of code. You hit double digits. So the last thing we want to, well, there's 2 more things that I want to do in this video before we move on that I think are important things to show. So the first one is that when our character moves to the left and to the right, he's always facing the same direction. So how do we fix that? Well, you could create a new sprite and have it change sprites when you're moving to the left or moving to the right. But there's a shortcut that a lot of games use, which is called flipping the X scale of the image. So there's a variable in GameMaker called image X scale. And you can open up the help file on this as well. Just middle click on it. You can see this value set horizontal scaling applied to the sprite has been assigned to the current instance. If the scale is 1, it indicates no scaling. Smaller values will scale down. 0.5, for example, will be half the width of the sprite. Larger values will scale up, and negative values will flip the sprite and scale it, unless the value is exactly -1, in which case the sprite is just flipped about its origin with no scaling. Oh, that sounds like exactly what we need, right? And we have the little pumpkin guy facing to the left and the little pumpkin guy facing to the right. So we're going to use this in order to flip our character. We'll say image X scale equals 1 when we're facing to the right. And then we'll say inside of here, make sure it's inside of your curly braces, curly brackets, image X scale equals -1. For facing to the left. So don't forget your semicolons and don't forget your curly brackets. Now your curly brackets, it's very important that they always have a pair. Same with these parentheses. And you can check it by clicking to the left to the left side of them. So when I click to the left of this one, it shows me that this is its pair right here. And if I click to the left of this one, it shows me that this is its pair right here. And same with these parentheses right here. So let's run this code and see how it goes. Now our character, okay, so he faces the other direction, but he's kind of jumping really crazy. Like, what's going on there, right? What is going on there? Well, if we come back to the help file, you'll notice something here that it says. It says, if it's negative, it will flip the sprite and scale it. In which case it will flip this, flip the sprite is just flipped about its origin. So the sprite is flipped about its origin. That's the important thing that I was looking for. So if we come into our sprites right here, and we come back to our workspace, and we double click on our skeleton idle, where is our origin? Well, it shows a little plus here for where our origin is, and it's clear up in the top left corner of our image. Now that is not where we want our origin. That is not a good spot for it, because when it flips, it's going to flip about this line right here. So that's why it looks like our character's jumping so much, because this image right here is flipping clear over to here, like this is the axis for flipping on. So we need to change that. So we're going to set our origin to a custom origin. We're going to set it to 24 in the X, which is pretty centered on our character right here. And then we'll set it to, now this part doesn't matter as much, but I think we should set it to the very bottom. So that would be 40. You can see our oh, it's 48 high, so 48. There we go. So 48 high, there we go. The origin is now right at our character's feet, like that. We've set the origin for this character. Then if we run the game, you can see now when our character flips, he flips in a way that seems more like it should. Flips in the correct axis. Now there's one more thing that I want to do, which is I want to show you guys your first error message. So we're going to pretend like you're writing your code right here in the mini challenge and you forgot a parenthesis right here. Now GameMaker is going to pop up with these little error messages, and if you hover over them, it's going to give you a cryptic little message, right? Unexpected syntax error right here at line 11, and got a square bracket, expected a comma or a parentheses. So it's not very, like, it's kind of specific if you read it, but it's saying it's on line 8, which is a little weird. So this is kind of some of the stuff that you have to be wary of. A lot of the time when you're writing code, it will give you an error message and it will say it's somewhere like right here, but in reality it's actually one line difference. So always check back a line or forward a line when you get error messages like this. Let's pretend we didn't notice and we tried to run our game. Let's see what kind of an error message we get. So down here it just says malformed if statement, got this bracket when expecting a other bracket. So it gives us a little bit more information, but it still says line 8, line 8. This one says line 7, so that's a little bit better. And you can double click to go to that specific bit of code. So let's fix it. We'll do that. Now let's do one more error. So that's an error that gives us down here before we even run. It's a compile error. It wasn't even able to compile our code. But let's say we were able to compile our code. Let's say we forgot our E in image X scale. Watch what GameMaker does here. It highlights it blue. It thinks this is a variable that we've created. And we haven't talked a lot about variables, but this is the most common error message that happens in GameMaker. So if we run our game, it manages to compile, and we don't even get an error message here. But our character no longer flips. So, It's because we're setting the variable instead of trying to access it. But we don't get any sort of an error message here, which can happen. Sometimes you have code that's actually compiles and it runs, but it's not the right code, and it's just an error, kind of like a user logic error or a typo like this. So when you do this, what you want to do is say, well, I expect, you want to look for the expected behavior. So say, what's your expected behavior? Well, the expected behavior is when I press the left key, my skeleton should turn around and face to the left, but that's not happening. When I press the left key, that doesn't happen. So then you come into your code and you say, well, what bit of code is relevant to that? Well, you'd come to where you press the left key, and then you'd come into where we set the image X scale that sets the character to face to the left. And you would look at this bit of code because this code is relative or tied to your expected result. So you want to look for your expected result and then go to the code that is going to be that would give you that expected result. So then we'll just set this back to image X scale, run our game, and we are good to go. So that's going to be all for part 2 here. We've got our character moving back and forth, and we've got him flipping his character sprite. We'll be adding more to this in the next part. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all in part 3.